The Challenger explosion. One of the biggest tragedies in American history. An event that scarred a generation. Its effects on nationalism and morale in America were felt throughout the country.
you know, I think the craziest thing, like looking back on it, not realizing at the time, but realizing now, I think the craziest thing to me was that that happened on live TV.
When I was a kid, that was something that people talked about a lot, especially because it was such a big deal with Krista McAuliffe being on it and the whole teacher in space thing. And so it was like kind of especially traumatic because there was this, whole other piece.
But the Challenger had flown 9 other successful missions before. What caused it to go wrong this time? Additionally, with America being in such a state of apprehension as it was because of the space race, how did this affect the average American? How did this affect this generation of Americans? What significance did it have on our nation? Times were tense in America. The space race was ongoing, and we were anxious to get a lead. Communism was big in Russia, and it was spreading fast. More and more nations were turning to it, and America was running out of ways to stop its spread. Americans believed that if they could hit a milestone in space travel and exploration, then that would show to the world as a whole that democracy in America was superior to Russia's communist antics. The problem lies in actually achieving any feat that could best the accomplishment that the Soviets had already made, such as putting a satellite in space. Enter the Challenger, NASA's second space shuttle to enter service. Originally a test prototype, it was eventually converted into a real spaceship to be added to NASA's fleet. It had flown several missions and was scheduled to launch on another on January 22nd with a crew of 7. One of these 7 was Krista McAuliffe, a social studies teacher who had won NASA's Teacher in Space program and also the first female to enter liftoff, and she was quite a popular figure in the event. She was seen as a hero among teachers, a source of pride on the nationalism already achieved from the launch itself. Additionally, the flight also was the first to have a black astronaut aboard, Ronald McNair. Overall, the flight as a whole was seen as a step in American space exploration and a display that Americans could do anything they dreamed of, no matter what race or sex they were.
And we went on the bus to the planetarium and we saw their star show. That was just about all they had at that time. And then as all the school kids from all the schools were filing out, the thing was wrapped up, we were finished going back to our buses, and the planetarium staff thought, oh, we'll give these kids a treat. We will display the Challenger with the famous school teacher on the ceiling of the planetarium.
I remember they brought 3 classes together, and we were all sitting there on the floor watching it because they were so excited because, I might say her name wrong, Kristen McCullough was on that original flight, and she was a teacher. And so as teachers and educators, they were excited to be watching this historic moment with her going up. I don't know if she was the first female or not. I don't remember, so shame on me with that. But they launched the shuttle. We were all in there watching together. And I do remember it exploding. And I remember the 3 or 4 teachers, the classes that were together in Miss Schrader's room, the room that I was in, the teachers were crying. They were very upset.
With all of this talk about how dreadful the incident was, you are probably wondering what actually went wrong. The Challenger had flown 9 successful flights beforehand, leaving people to have quite the confidence in the spacecraft. It had even been the first spacecraft to carry astronauts on a mission to repair a satellite in space. So, with all of these successes, the sudden combustion was an obvious surprise to people. What went wrong? The answer lies in the weather. The temperatures on January 28, 1986 were below freezing, causing problems in the O-rings or gasket rings of the Challenger. When this happened, it caused a leak of gas that eventually caught in the fire of the engines and led to a chain reaction when the Challenger went to full throttle.
So the failure was actually on one of the rockets that the shuttle was attached to. So the shuttle's meant to be able to propel itself around in space and then to land again, sort of like an airplane does. And so the shuttle itself is reusable, but it gets strapped to big rockets that are what allow it to actually take off and get out of our atmosphere. And somewhere in one of those rockets, there was a rubber gasket that was supposed to seal a fuel line. And because of the weather being so cold, the rubber gasket was kind of brittle and shrunken. It wasn't really sealing as well. And so that caused a leak of, I think it was hot gas at that point. So when the rocket took off, that leak combusted and then the whole thing exploded.
Here, you can see the O-rings that failed in the cold temperatures, leading to the leaking gas and the eventual explosion. Such a problem took just the right circumstances and was not able to be predicted by NASA, as they had failed to listen to potential warnings about the rocket itself and failed to properly test all of the materials in extreme weathers. After this incident, NASA's space program was put into delay as they took time to not only mourn the loss of the crew, but to analyze what went wrong with the shuttle. In doing this, NASA learned how to better engineer the machines in a way that provides more security and more promise of safety.
So I think we learned a lot about testing every component and how the components work together and how to identify potential failure points ahead of time, rather than just assuming it's all going to work together. I also think we've learned a lot more about materials and the way that they're going to react in different situations, because that was one of the biggest problems with it, was that they just hadn't really thought through how each individual material, even something as small as a rubber gasket, is going to react in an extreme condition. I would assume, I don't know a lot of details about this, but I would assume they're probably also a lot pickier about when they'll let launches go now, given that something that seemed like good weather, but it was just too cold and that particular material failed because of the cold. So I'm sure that they have learned a lot about when to plan launch windows and when they do need to reschedule, even though that maybe puts a schedule behind or causes other problems. When it's for safety, we have to do that.
But what effect did the Challenger explosion actually have?
The public display of death. It's horrifying. It's generally bad for humans to see that, and probably worse for little kids to see that.
I think the fact that it was live TV, and I do remember I can still see Miss Schrader walking up to the TV and just kind of turning it off, and she did not make a big production of it or make a big deal out of it or anything like that. And then she handed out the coloring sheets. We colored the rest of the way, and then we went home. I do remember, if I was sitting in the room right now, they were back here in the left corner, the 4 teachers, and I couldn't tell you who the other 3 were. I just remember my teacher, that they were all very upset and crying because of what had happened.
While the Challenger failure did cause a delay in our advances in space exploration and a dent in our American pride, it is deemed by most to be a necessary step towards one of our greatest successes, the Apollo moon landing. But the recovery took a while and was not immediate. All of America went into a state of grief, causing even Ronald Reagan to give a week delay to his State of the Union address in order to have time to properly grieve.
More delays than NASA cares to count. This morning, it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
So, the Challenger shuttle, a test vehicle turned into NASA's second fully operational shuttle. Flown by 7 pilots, it flew its very last mission on January 28, 1986. Due to unforeseen weather problems, an O-ring malfunctioned and leaked fuel, causing the shuttle to arrive at a fiery demise. Thousands tuned in to watch its launch happen live on their very own home televisions, and thousands watched as it exploded and burned in the sky. This moment, while often forgotten and overlooked, is very important because its impact in the moment was major. It was a big incident, and it should be remembered and given its due respect. Families were devastated and left in dismay at the horror they were watching. The people of America could only hope to look towards a brighter future in the accomplishments of NASA.